That's not the right one. There it is. All right. We are going to go into a trip and explore. I'm going to do a screen share. And you're going to get a chance to see this. I'm going to do a full slideshow here. There we go. All right. Excellent. So we are going to talk about the Buddhist conception of reality. And in Buddhist, I want to preface this by saying this is the Theravadin school of Buddhism, the Mahayana school, there are other schools of Buddhism that would do this differently, but I'm giving you one look at it. And although they're different, they're all going to be somewhat similar. So you've got four ultimate realities in Buddhism. You've got the physical universe, which is the material world, the tangible experience of reality. That's one of the ultimate realities. The second one is consciousness itself. And that is its own experience of reality. It has its own, it's in a sense separate from the physical universe and discontinuous with the physical universe. It exists outside physical universe in a sense. They're related to each other, but they're different. And then consciousness itself is mental states are built on top of consciousness. So they're different than consciousness. And an easy way to understand this might be to think about a tree. So a tree is something that exists in the physical universe. And then there's this experience of consciousness of the tree. And the experience of consciousness is different from the tree. It's inside of our heads, and we're constructing this experience of the tree. But there's kind of a low-level experience of treeness, we might call it, that we would experience. And then there is, in the mental states, there is the recognition, oh, that is a maple tree that is changing color. It's got beautiful reds and yellows and oranges and some green still. And so we'll have, and it's a certain size and it's a certain shape that we might measure. The mental states have a way that it digests and analyzes and experiences what's happening out there. So the way that conscious experience is conceptualized and stored is mental states. And mental states have a discrete quality to them in that there are 52 of them, but that's jumping ahead. Now, what's super important here is that number 4 is not something that's part of the physical universe. It's not something that's part of the experience of consciousness, and it is not the contents of the conceptualization of consciousness. Nibbana is actually something different, something very odd, strange, and mysterious. So this is the basics that we're working with in Buddhism, is these 4 realities. I wanted to show you the cosmology of Buddhism. these are different states of being that one can be in. In the Buddhist, this is, again, the Theravadin construction. The ones that are the four on the bottom are the lower than human experiences. The human realm is this one place that we're getting to occupy right now. But above the human realm, they have some large number, I think in this case would be 20 some heaven realms that have different qualities to them. So, here with the simple Christian construction, you've got heaven and hell and where we are right now. This Buddhist construction has a very sophisticated heaven realm. You got 4 hell realms, but you've got this enormous number of heaven realms. And they're all pretty nice, these heaven realms. You can see that there are these sensuous, blissful realms. It's easier to see. I don't want to spend a lot of time going through all these, but just to say that there's these realms that are have a material construction and that they relate to the material world, and then there's ones that don't relate to the material world at all. So maybe you take some pretty powerful drugs, you might be able to experience these realms. I don't know, but I'm just letting you know that this is kind of this. I wanted to show you the hell realms are evidently the one on the far left. That hell realm is all about places that are, you've got your traditional fire kind of a hell, but it's also, they've got the freezing hell, it's a really cold, and then there's all different kinds of unpleasantness that sort of are exaggerated miseries of human existence. In the Buddhist construction, the animals are in a lower state than humanity. And so to be reborn as an animal is kind of a demotion in a sense. Then there's these crazy, weird, non-material creatures called hungry ghosts. And they have these incredibly thin, long necks and big bellies. And they are perpetually thirsty and hungry, but they can't put in their mouths enough to satisfy them because they can't get it down these little tiny necks. So they're in this perpetual state of want and dissatisfaction. Oh, we got somebody in the waiting room. We'll let them in. So we've got our animals, hungry ghosts in the hell realm, and then this Asura, and I think these are like demons or something like that. They're kind of human-ish, but are consumed with anger and hatred, and really, these are very unpleasant states. But let's not deal with these much more. Let's go look at the heaven realms, because the heaven realms are so much better than the hell realms. And again, we're breaking them up into, these are all, you go into these heaven realms when you have positive, you accumulate good karma, you do good things in your life, and you can get reborn into these states. But I don't want to spend much time here because I just wanted to give you a little tour of that, just to let you know that it exists. All right. So we talked a little bit about these. The important thing about these different levels of being, whether it's a God realm or a human or a hell realm, what's important is different, which is actually, this is very consistent with universalism, is that these are all impermanent and that nobody goes into a hell realm forever. They definitely get reborn back into, maybe you're in hell realm, you'll be reborn as an animal or a hungry ghost or as a demon or something. But eventually you'll use up your negative karma in these in these unpleasant realms, and you get reborn as a human being. And then hopefully you'll have a chance to have a positive life where you'll get reborn in one of the more positive realms. What's important and critical in the Buddhist cosmology is that it's only in the human realm that you can do the work that allows you to move out of samsara, which this is all samsara, the heaven realms, the hell realm, it's the whole 9 yards. Everything here is all samsara. It's all the world of form, and this is the realm in which dukkha or suffering operates. The thing that you can achieve in the human realm is the ability to experience and move towards nibbana. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's go the other direction. So what is the world of form? Matter, rupa is the word that they use for matter. There are the concretely produced pieces, and this kind of is very similar to what you might find in more traditional thinking of the earth, water, fire, and air elements. And in meditation practice, these elements are often referred to, and this is whether you want to, I mean, they're kind of simplistic for our thinking when we think about how many elements there are in the periodic table. We've got a much more sophisticated view of all this than they did. But the bodily experience of earth element, water element, fire element, air element make a lot of sense as embodied experience, feeling like you're on fire, or that feeling of a sense of lightness, or air coming into the lungs and going out of the lungs. Certainly water makes sense in terms of the fluids in our body. Earth element, the sense of feeling the substantive nature of skin and bones. And then certainly the fire, the feeling of having this, because we're constantly on fire, because we're constantly burning the food that we eat. We have to be able to survive. And so these are very useful ways to focus in on the bodily processes, so that it's helpful to work with that. Now, the sensitive phenomena are working with how the physicality of the senses, how there's the sense of ear sensitivity, which would be the sense of pressure on the eardrum, the sense of light coming into the eyes, the experience of sensing smell, which can actually be a physical sense. So sound, smell, taste, and then that matches with those other three cognitive experiences. The other material phenomenon, I think, again, a little cryptic. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I think that the one, number 16, I think is quite useful for us, is the sense of the heart base. And for me, that kind of lines up with the heart chakra, and just that sense of having the feeling of loving kindness. So understanding that as having a physical base that you can connect with can be very helpful. And then number 17 is life faculty. That one, I think, would pretty closely align with our understanding from Eastern spirituality of qi or qigong, that kind of that energy in the body, sense of flow of energy in the body. And I don't think I want to spend a lot of time on the non-concrete matter, but space element, the sense of being in a trying to experience a room as space rather than walls and objects, but just be sort of aware of the space of the room, that space is itself its own kind of thing. and then just the feeling of bodily having a body and being in a body, or this experience of the vibration of verbal communication. We'll talk about these a little bit later, but the ones that are kind of interesting that are on this list are decay and impermanence. Thinking of those qualities of physical matter is that that there's this nature that things are here temporarily. It's kind of helpful to work with, and that has a physical quality to it too. All right. So actually, there's one slide I want to look at before this that I added. I want to talk a little bit about how consciousness works. And Bhavan, I'm not sure how you say this, Bhavanga, yeah, that sounds about right, Bhavanga. Bhavanga is this very interesting substrate of consciousness. If all the senses were quiet, for example, what they talk about as a way to get in touch with what this experience of consciousness would be is deep, dreamless sleep. This is like the ground. They use the example of the ground of becoming. This is the difference between being alive and dead. Because this consciousness is always present while you're alive. This is everything is built on everything we have. It's like the lowest level of consciousness you can have and be awake. Maybe some low-level organisms operate in this kind of consciousness, like maybe, I don't know, a hydra or one of those, maybe even an amoeba or something like that might have this kind of, this might be the lowest level of consciousness that it might experience. Nothing more complicated than that, but for us, we build all of our consciousness on top of this substrate, this ground. And any conscious activity that we have, this would not be. And I think I think it may actually continue a little bit after the moment of death. One way to look at this is the pause before any mental process begins. And it has, it is one of the ways to understand this is that it's a linkage between life, between lives, between, there's another word for that's similar, that links one lifetime to a next, because Buddhists are definitely believe in multiple incarnations. And so this is the thread. This kind of, think of it as a thread that runs between lifetimes. So that's the ground which consciousness is built on. And then each experience of consciousness is the accumulation into a moment of consciousness of 17 micro mind moments, of which this is the fundamental. That's always every mind moment begins with this consciousness, because it arises from this place. And basically what's happening is an object appears at a sense door. So that's kind of the beginning. And then the attention moves towards that sense door. And that's when we have this, and I don't want to get into too much details here because it's all very complicated, but there's a sense of receiving the sensation of the sense door. And then there's from the receiving, then there's the bringing the sense of the mind to that And that's what this, there's the receiving and the movement of the mind towards it. And then then there begins this process of trying to determine what that object is. So this recognition process, which they're using the word determining for in this particular example. And then the mind, once the mind has sort of collected around this sensing experience, that's when it tries to examine the object. It sort of wraps its consciousness, sort of envelops whatever this sense experience is, and it's doing this act of comprehension, of which it's kind of a complicated process. They talk about it as taking up 7 mind moments, and we're not going to spend any time talking about this, but just to, and then finally you get to this place where you have that object and you've recognized it, and it has solidified as there's this sense of registering it. So I want to see if I can go back now. Oops. All right, let's go back now. Now we can talk about the mind states of consciousness. So I think all those 17 moments kind of gets you to this mind state of contact. So that's where you're beginning with that. The mind is, we're trying to take this incredible process of how the mind functions and trying to distill this incredibly complex process into this experience of contact. So this is where we know we've had contact with the outside world. We're in our heads and we're experiencing that we've contacted something. And the first thing, we've talked a little bit about this, that happens when we contact the world is we evaluate it with feeling. Basic function of the human being is you have to sense whether what you're in contact with is something that's a positive or a negative. Positive in that it has a pleasant valence, or it has a negative or unpleasant valence. So it's either a threat, or it could be a positive, something we want to move towards. Could be food that we want to eat. Could be somebody that we want to experience a pleasant contact with. So we're always in this constant, this happens so many times a moment, where we're trying to evaluate what's going on out there in the world. And is it a threat, or is it something we want to move towards? At that point, then we get to perception. And that's the moment where the mind has figured out what's going on. What is that out there that we've had contact, we've reacted to it with, we've evaluated it with feeling, and now we're really settling into the perception of what it was. And the next act of volition can come almost immediately. For example, if something is a threat, we might immediately have a reaction to that and want to do something. One of the ways to look at volition is that volition is not necessarily something we choose. There may or may not be any decision with volition. Because the example that I wanted to use is, let's say we see something that we perceive that might be dangerous. What's a volitional act that might immediately happen is the heart might start beating faster, or the muscles might tense. The initiation of the fight, flight, freeze response might happen almost immediately from perception to volition. So those 4 are always going on. This is basic survival mechanism of our bodies, is those 4. The 5th is where we start to getting more sophisticated perception, because those first 4 animals experience. Those are all common. I mean, amoeba experiences this kind of stuff. Very low-level life forms experience the first 4. I think as you get into more sophisticated life forms, then the one-pointedness becomes evident, in that this is where consciousness starts to focus on the object that has been perceived. And so that the mind collects on that object with a, and then, so that one-pointedness, in the sense that there's always one-pointedness, suggests that the attention is always moving from object to object. We're always scanning, we're always looking, but we're never looking at the whole so much as we are picking individual things to pay attention to. Even when we're looking at the whole, that's still a one-pointedness of holding the whole of a sense, something like that. Easier to notice with sounds, in that you'll notice that your attention with sounds will move from different things. You'll select different of the sound sphere. You'll be trying to pay attention to different things in the sound sphere. So the life faculty has to do with, again, this experience of just being alive, basically, the experience of being conscious and having the energy of consciousness. And then attention is kind of a different level of where one-pointedness is the focus. Attention is just being aware of the whole flow of the thing. So this is called universals, because all of these seven, with any experience of consciousness, those seven are always operating. Now, what's not always operating are 8 through 13, the occasionals. And these are super important for meditation, because what we are trying to do in meditation is we are cultivating often in these, in the meditation practice. On Sunday, I was talking about working with the breath and how the consciousness of putting your attention on something, because this is all moving into where there's direct direction happening. Putting your attention on the breath as your breath changes from in to out or out to in, and applying your attention to that, and then sustaining the attention as the breath goes out or the breath goes in, or if the breath stops, sustaining your attention on the breath being not coming in or out, being in a sense attentive to waiting for that. And then once the breath starts to come in, starts to go out, applying the initial intention. So these are discrete mind states in Buddhist understanding of how mind works. There's the initial application of mind to something, and then if we continue our attention on that object, there's this different kind of consciousness that you can experience of sustained attention. It's good to experiment with this, just noticing when you're doing something, maybe you're making food, cooking, something like that, just noticing how your attention moves to different objects, and then there's the sustaining of that attention on what you're watching. Because when you're having sustained attention, that tends to bring the mind and narrow the mind to the object that you're looking at. Then there's this decision consciousness. That's where you're making a choice. And that when I talked about in meditation practice, when you notice that you've gone off the breath, that noticing is not a volitional process. That's something that happens. It's a moment of mindfulness that just pops in. The decision to go back to watching the breath, that's a decision. That's number 10. And cultivating that decision strengthens the meditation practice. Number 11 is just the energy of bringing enthusiasm, energy to the practice of whatever you're doing. That is a discrete kind of just being aware of having energy in the body and applying that to what you're doing. It's similar, but a little different than zest or pity. which is more, has a more positive valence. It's more of like an excited, enrapturous kind of experience. It's very pleasant. Whereas energy might be more neutral. Zest has got a very pleasant tone to it. And then desire. Now, desire, this is very different from, we talked about tanha, or the second noble truth of craving. That's a problem. This is different than craving. This is not a negative desire. This is a desire to apply oneself to something that's wholesome. It's a wholesome desire rather than an unwholesome desire. And it's a desire that leads one to invest energy, that leads to this positive experience. So a lot of meditation practice is cultivating these 6 qualities of mind states. These are mind states that are very, very helpful for meditation practice. So they're good to be familiar with and to get to know them and love them. All right. I love talking about the unwholesome mind states. So on the right side, you've got the unwholesome, the bad ones. This is the nasty stuff that happens in mind that we don't want. These are things you'd like to avoid. But what's interesting about these, I mean, wrong view, which is basically delusional view, just confusion, or even just misunderstanding could be wrong view. But greed, conceit, hatred, envy, avarice, sloth, torpor, worry, I mean, even doubt, all these things are just very unpleasant. I mean, you don't need to be convinced that these are unwholesome. They're pretty naturally resonant as being things that life is really much better when they're not present. But what's really intriguing to me about these mind states is the universals, that there's 4 qualities that tend to go along with these mind states, especially if they're not abandoned. So let's say greed is present, and one recognizes there's greed, but one continues to dwell in greed. The qualities that are universal in that experience that will be also co-present with these other mind states will tend to show up when any of these other occasionals show up, are confusion, delusion, that this is worth putting my time and energy into, are these occasionals. A sense of shamelessness, which is this sense that these are things that it's not a big deal, I don't have to worry about them. This sense of non-recognition of the fact that these are harmful to yourself and others. And that close second to that is this fearlessness of doing wrong. So you're experiencing hatred and you're thinking to yourself, this person really deserves this hatred. So there's a sense that this fearlessness, that hatred is not harming you, it's only harming that other person. So this sense of fearlessness, I think, is really, really helpful. And then, interestingly enough, restlessness goes along with this. And this is really, really helpful to know that restlessness goes along with these other experiences. So one can use restlessness as like a little alert, a little signal to pay attention to. Is when restlessness is going on, you could say, oh, I wonder if one of these unwholesome factors is present right now. Maybe doubt, maybe envy or conceit, or who knows. Just so it's something to notice. So confusion and restlessness, I think shamelessness and fearlessness, not always as easy to recognize, but definitely delusion and restlessness can be helpful clues as to something fishy's going on. So enough for unwholesome states. Let us celebrate and enjoy the mind states that are wholesome. So, wholesome mind states. Now, this word faith is not faith in God. That's not this quality of what faith means, although faith in God might be a fine thing to cultivate that might be parallel to this experience. But this kind of faith is oriented towards confidence. There's just this sense that I'm doing the right thing, I'm following the practice, I'm getting results from the practice, and I'm feeling confidence. I know I'm doing the right thing, and I'm really feeling great about it. So that there's this sense of where that faith comes from. And certainly the more one studies and the Dharma and more one understands the teachings and sees how they function, that faith definitely continues to grow and develop. I really like the word sati more than mindfulness. I often use the word knowing as a parallel for sati. It can also be, sometimes people use awareness, but awareness has its own special meaning in Buddhism that's a little more global than sati is this sense of that it's that recognition, knowing of what is arising and what's happening now. So we have in the unwholesome mind states, shamelessness. Well, shame in the experience of knowing that something is wrong is very helpful because it keeps you in that fear of wrong. So it's kind of the complement to the other two. Certainly, if greed and hatred are bad, the opposite are good. Non-greed, non-hatred. Non-greed could also be translated as generosity. Non-hatred could be translated as loving kindness or just care, compassion. Some of these ones after this are a little more opaque. Neutrality of mind, which is more, I think, a quality of equanimity, which is this sense of being willing to be present with whatever arises, rather than trying to shelter oneself from reality, just being willing to be present with reality as it is. That's kind of a neutrality of mind. Tranquility is a very pleasant state of consciousness where the mind is quiet and peaceful. That's something that is a very, very wholesome thing to cultivate. This lightness, malleability, and wieldiness, these are just the best way to understand this is just the softness of mind, this receptiveness, the willingness to be present with life as it is, and not move into negative mind states, but just trying to stay with the reality as it is, and to be receptive, curious, interested. So these are pointing towards that direction. And we can sort of, I think, proficiency and rectitude have much more technical explanations that we can skip over for the moment. And let's go to the occasionals. So these are qualities that are not always present, because whenever there's a wholesome factor, the other factors tend to show up along with them, the universals. So right speech and right action, right livelihood are also kind of avoiding speech that could be harmful, actions that could be harmful, or a livelihood that could be harmful. So there's in their definition, they're kind of avoiding harmful actions. So they have this different valence. They can be positive and helpful to people, certainly, having using one's speech to help rather than harm is very, very good, very wholesome. Giving assistance to others, all the things that we would think of as good actions, and certainly using one's life energy for wholesome purposes. All these are wonderful things. Compassion and appreciative joy, very, very wholesome states of consciousness to cultivate. The Buddha called compassion and appreciative joy illimitables, in that there's no limit to how much you can do them and get benefit, which I find very inspirational as I try to be a good minister and be compassionate and appreciative of people. Appreciative joy is taking delight in other people's joy and positive mind states, positive feeling. And finally, the wisdom faculty. This is where I think it connects beautifully with Unitarian Universalism, because we are big, big celebrators of wisdom and the cultivation of wisdom. And that those are all very, very beneficial for humanity, very wholesome factors to cultivate wisdom. So those are all wonderful states of mind to be trying to develop. And just, I'm thinking this list would be great to put on the refrigerator to remind you of wholesome mind states. So we looked at consciousness already. Now, before we get too far along, the last thing I wanted to talk about is this mysterious thing called nibbana. Now, nibbana literally means extinguishing a flame. And it has to do with thinking about an ember. And the fuel for the flame is that comes from that ember, and the flame is above and consuming the fuel that comes off of that ember. One might think of an ember as one's accumulated karma. And as one works through one's karma, it literally burns off. And as if one gets through all of one's karma and all of the maybe negative things that you've done, you've atoned for, you've worked through all of the stuff. And when that's done, the flame goes out. And so that's one way to look at nibbana. It's this extinguishing of a flame. It's also a state where there is it's the opposite of the greed state, it's the opposite of the hatred state, and it's the opposite of the delusion and the ignorance states. So this is, again, the opposite of what drives. So we have this experience of dukkha, which is that the world has these qualities to it that are pretty unpleasant at times. Sickness, old age, and death being the prime movers of the unpleasantness. And as we get older, we get very familiar with those unpleasantness states. So and it's tanha is the second noble truth. So you get the first noble truth. Life has this unpleasantness to it that can't be removed. And then we make it worse with greed, hatred, and being confused about the fact that thinking greed and hatred will solve our problems. When that's extinguished, that's when there's the opportunity for touching into this nibbana. Now, because this greed and hatred delusion is the fuel for all of existence, that nibbana is then the end of that, which means that's the end of the material world. In a sense, you're moving out of the material world to maybe to this nibbana. What's interesting is that Samsara includes all the heaven realms. So when you're talking about nibbana, you're actually not in that cosmology. You're moving out of the physical world cosmology into something else. God only knows what it is, but something else. The Buddha talked about it as ultimate freedom and awakening. He used these words: the blissful, the secure, the pure, the island, the shelter, the harbor, the refuge. Just contemplating those words can be an interesting engagement with this nibbana, trying to figure out what it is. The other thing that he said about it was something that's pretty confusing. It's the unconstructed, the ageless, the deathless, the featureless. None of this makes sense because we live in this material world where things are constantly being constructed. Things get age no matter what happens in our world. It arises, it hits here, and it passes away. That is everything in the material world operates in that realm. There is no deathless that we know of in this material world that we're in. So, what is this nibbana? Featureless, infinite, and luminous all around. Very, very difficult to understand. But what the Buddha was very clear about was this is something that is humans are capable of experiencing. The hell realms, you can't experience it. The heaven realms, little question about whether you can experience it. I think you can get primed to experience it maybe in a, I don't know, this is debatable, the question of whether you can experience this in the heaven realm or not. But generally, from what I understand, is you have to be a human being. You have to be in the human realm to be able to experience this nibbana. And Gil Fronsdale is a pretty experienced meditation teacher in the insight meditation tradition. And he has this lovely quote, which is, walking the path toward the complete ending of clinging and suffering is the noblest thing a person can do. It opens the fist of the mind and allows a person to walk in the world with gift-bestowing hands. I think that's a lovely quote. So that's what I have for you. I'm going to stop share. And I am going to stop recording too. So I hope you enjoyed that presentation, everybody who are watching this later.